Apologies. My apologies. We had thought we'd reconvene at 3, so Commissioner Purvis is not here, but we only need 4 commissioners to be properly constituted. Can you please call the hearing number for the record?
Hearing number 4 of 12 September 2019.
Thank you. And can you call the next witness, please?
Next witness, Mr. Patrick Lablache.
I,
Mr. Patrick Lablache,
Mr. Patrick Lablache,
do swear
do swear
to tell the truth,
to tell the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lablache, for coming. Sorry for changing the time on you. Sorry for not including it on our original schedule. So we called you really as a sort of expert witness because of the various positions that you've held in the government in relation to land and land acquisition. So the Commission considers that you're uniquely placed to give us evidence about land and land acquisitions during the Second Republic, including government policy. We do have a lot of cases dealing with land acquisition matters. So to get a broad understanding from you would be very helpful. I'm completely ignorant. I'm sure my other national commissioners have a better understanding, but if you could go ahead, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner, distinguished commissioners. I gather I've been called here to talk about the case of Mr. Betsey. Am I correct, or you would want
If you have information in relation to Mr. Betsey's case, that would be very helpful for us. But also more broadly, we sort of see you as an expert in land. So Mr. Betsey's case definitely, and then more broadly, thank you.
Okay, maybe I will start with Mr. Betsey's case. In fact, I don't know much about the case. When I was asked to come here, I obviously did some research in the ministry, and I found out that it was not a case per se of the ministry. It was not a land acquisition case. I found out that it was a case of repossession on a default of mortgage, which was done under the People's Housing Mortgage Act of 1981. This act actually was enacted to deal with mortgages granted by government or any of its corporations, parasitals. At the time, it was, I believe, the Seychelles Housing Development Corporation, SHDC, which was administering mortgages. And of course, I got some officers in the ministry to do some research in the land registry because we had nothing on file really. And I found out that it was repossessed in 1984. It was submitted, it was filed to the court, the Supreme Court, and it was Judge Wood who made the order to repossess in favor of Seychelles Housing Development Corporation. Subsequent to that,
It was 1984 when it was repossessed.
it was repossessed in 1984, but registered in the registry on the 2nd of July 1986. But the order of Judge Wood is dated 19th July 1984. Although the order was actually registered in the land registry on the 2nd of July 1986. Subsequent to that, I also found out that the property was sold by the SHDC to Mr. Serge Motti in 1994 on the 6th of April for 80,000 rupees. It was brought to my attention by the minister because I believe Mr. Betsey did have an audience with her, Mrs. Pamela Charlotte, and she directed me to a dossier, which obviously maybe it can shed some light on this case. After the property was repossessed, I note that there's been some correspondence with SHDC, but of course we do not have the files in the ministry because it's an SHDC filings system. They don't exist anymore, so.
I was going to ask if you had any idea where those files were.
I don't know where they are.
Okay.
I know the special advisor in the ministry tried to locate, but could not find anything. Although there seems to be some correspondence which I managed to pluck out. One which actually says that SHDC is prepared to sell back the property to Mr. Betsey. So if I look at this correspondence, I don't know if you want to have a copy. You would want me to hand you a copy. It might clear the air a little bit. One is a letter on the 3rd of November, 1992, returned to Mr. Betsey. And it says that the property at La Misère, comprising B341, repossessed by our corporation, will be transferred on your name back, provided you pay sum of 63,223.83 rupees to our corporation. The said sum represents a capital of 60,489.22 and interest 2,734.61 for the period until July 1984. The corporation expects your reply within 3 weeks from the date of this letter so that we could decide this matter otherwise. You can also send your reply through fax. Thanking you for your kind consideration, Mr. Raja Sundaran. He was the legal counsel for SHDC. Mr. Raja, I'll call him Raja, writes again on the 24th of June 1993, and he says part payment of 10,000 rupees, although I don't know where the 10,000 rupees comes from because his first letter doesn't make any reference to that. His first letter says 63,223, and then there seems to be a caption on top, part payment of 10,000 rupees. This letter serves as final reminder as to the part payment of 10,000 rupees towards the purchase price of 63,224 for the property B341 that you agreed to purchase. Therefore, you are requested to pay the sum on or before the 10th of July 1993. Please take further notice that failure to comply with the above will result in suitable decision so as to sell the said property to some other needy family. Thanking you for your understanding. Yours faithfully, Raja. It seems to me there would have been some, but although I don't see the correspondence, some agreement reached subsequent to that first letter that SHDC would accept a first payment of 10,000 rupees and then maybe part payment in installments. Then there's a letter from Mr. Betsey himself, addressed to Mr. Raja. The 8th July 1993, we are now in July. Many thanks for your letter dated 24th June 1993. Yeah. It is with great concern and sadness that I have to write to you again on the above matter. I have only come back from UK last month, trying very hard to sell our house there, but without success due to the recession situation. I would be very appreciative and grateful if the SHDC would like to give me at least an extra 14 to 21 days to settle the above sum. Therefore, the transfer could go ahead very promptly. I have already been contacting some financial institutions and some friends in order to get the financial support needed within the next 2 weeks. I hope you can take the matter into great consideration after staying in exile for the last 14 years and to come back come back without somewhere to live is quite a stressing experience. Thank you in advance for your cooperation. I note that the letter is actually copied to Dolo and Esta, who was, it seems to be the director of the SHDC at the time. I'm not sure. Mr. Padiwala, attorney at law. Mr. P. Padiwala. It's copied. This is what I have on that file. There may be other correspondence which I'm not aware of. So from that letter of 93, 8 July, there is another, there's a fax, urgent fax to Mr. Raja, attorney at law, from Mr. Betsey, dated the 28th of March, 1994. Dear Mr. Raja, as per our telephone conversation this morning, I wish to confirm that we are now in a position to transfer the part payment of 10,000 rupees for plot 3, Beauty for One at La Misère. I understand that you will have to refer the case to the minister and that you will revert to us at your earliest convenience. I will telephone you on Wednesday, 30th March until 1:30 p.m. Seychelles time for a final decision. If it's been accepted, please advise the account number so that telegraphic transfer can be executed. Thank you in advance, Mr. and Mrs. J. Betsey. So this is basically all I have, all I can trace. So I don't know what happened. We were not dealing with it. It was the SHDC. This is where all I can contribute, I'm afraid.
I guess we know, so from that 28th of March letter, there was a Land Registration Act transfer of land dated 6th of April, where the Housing Development Corporation transferred the land to Serge Monti for 80,000 rupees. I mean, I think, the case is they borrowed from the SHDC. They were forced into exile. They didn't pay back the loan. And then it was some years before the land was repossessed by the Seychelles Housing Development Corporation, like about 7 years. 7 years, you think?
I believe the mortgage was taken in 79.
79.
And yeah, you are right, 84.
84.
Possession.
It was taken. And then we get to, and then that land is, nothing's done with it all that time. It's just sitting there with the Seychelles Housing Development Corporation. And then there's negotiations in 93 to get, starting in 93, by the looks of it, to get the land back. And then there seems to be a gap between July 93, when there's a request that they be given extra time, and then until March 94. And then when they think they can make the payment, the land is transferred shortly thereafter. I mean, could you sort of outline for us the policy that applied to the sale of land and whether that policy applied to the Seychelles Housing Development Corporation? That would be useful.
Honestly, I would not know what actually transpired in Seychelles Housing Development Corporation, because it was a parastatal company with a board of directors. Although the minister of the ministry at the time would have been would have given policy directives to the board, but it was a parastatal and a legal entity, really.
But it's not independent from the government, right? As a parastatal, it's...
No, it was not
No.
independent. No.
Was there, I mean, more broadly, was there, in the Second Republic, a general policy that every needy family would be assisted in getting a plot of land and a house? And, I mean, was that sort of like the general policy of the...
That's
And-
correct. It's
and
always been the policy
it's-
of the government.
Yeah.
that,
So the Seychelles Housing Development Corporation would follow that policy as well. That would be its. I mean, I'm just sort of wondering whether the land was sold to a needy family, if that was the policy.
Normally, the corporation would not have land to sell. It would give out loans. It was the mandate of SHDC was actually to give out mortgages to facilitate the construction of houses and take a mortgage to secure the loan. Obviously, I would think that in this case, particular case, the property was repossessed as a,
But was there any sort of like government policy if property was repossessed, should it go to public auction, or was there any sort of policy like that would govern repossessed property?
I think when I mentioned earlier the People's Housing Mortgage Act, normally, if you had borrowed from a bank, any other financial institution other than SHDC or government entity, this act was enacted in '81 in order to facilitate, maybe, I don't know, maybe some people were not, there were a lot of defaulters then, maybe government at the time wanted to find a way to get this property, instead of having it auctioned through the court, having it a faster way, a more efficient way of repossessing. So basically this act was drafted so as to, although you had to go to court, the court had to give the order, but it was not auctioned in court. Like for a bank, it would normally go on under a public auction in court. But for SHDC at the time, it was under the People's Mortgage Act.
Mr. Lablache, good afternoon. Was there a sort of general policy from the Ministry of Land? Because we have got many cases of land being dispossessed and repossessed by the government or the corporation, and then these land were offered to people in need. Was there a direct policy from the government to dispossess people of their land so as to be able to share the land later with other people?
When you mention dispossess, you mean recover under a mortgage or acquired by government? There is a distinction there.
There are many cases, part of them are part of a mortgage, another one because the people they took not a loan, but they were not able to continue to pay because they were in exile.
I'm not aware. Actually, I'm not aware of these cases, these particular cases. I'm not aware because I didn't work for SHDC, so I don't know.
There are other cases which complain about the government acquiring their land, compulsorily acquiring their land, and the complainants in a lot of those cases say that they were forced to do that under duress, that they didn't want to give up their land, and their land was taken under the Lands Acquisition Act and said it was in the public interest, but then nothing happened to their land, or what happened to their land wasn't in the public interest. So more broadly, could you tell us about the Lands Acquisition Act and how that was implemented, and was it really implemented for the public interest?
I think in the early days, when I actually started work for government in way back in '79, the Lands Acquisition Act had been drafted, and when an acquisition of land was found to be necessary to be for a public purpose, okay? So the public purpose was actually defined in the Act at the time as being something that would be of benefit in the public interest, like a school, hospital, housing for the people, a lighthouse, I mean, anything that would benefit the community at large. In the later years, and of course government also negotiated with landowners when it needed land for development projects, housing, for all the related. It actually made an offer, and obviously some people sold, although it could have been, yes, it could have been under duress at the time. They sold. Others, because government needed the land urgently, it was done through an acquisition order under the Lands Acquisition Act. And of course, under the Act, there are procedures for claiming compensation. So later on, in the mid-'80s maybe, if I recollect, the Act was amended to broaden the spectrum of public purpose. It was changed to a national interest, and that is very, very wide. I mean, it would allow what's in the national interest. It could be anything, really. So,
Who determined national interest?
it would be the minister.
So, land acquired under the national interest. Can you give us some examples in your experience? Because I understand you know every plot of land in the country. Is it in your experience? Can you give us some examples of what the national interest was? I mean, some of the complaints that I have read is like somebody's farm was acquired in the national interest and given to someone else to farm. It's just an allegation, but that's sort of, I'm trying to understand what the national interest was at that time.
I mean, these decisions were made at either at cabinet level at the time, or by the president and the minister. Maybe the minister would consult the president, and
Intriguing. So you're just like someone would be looking around going, that looks like a piece of land that could be in the national interest.
Well, I think there were some projects. There were a lot of housing projects going on at the time. But it gave government very wide powers, and whether these powers were abused, I don't know.
I mean, would it be in the national interest to acquire property from someone who didn't support the government, the regime? Would that be in the national interest?
It depends, I suppose, how you look at it. I mean, I'm not the judge of it. I believe if a decision is made at the political level, the executive level of government, then the ministry has to execute it.
I mean, a lot of the cases we have claim that the property was compulsorily acquired because they didn't support the regime. So it was like a punishment in a way. That's what they allege. So I'm just, trying to think, is there any, merit in thinking that would be an approach that would be acceptable? in the Second Republic?
Well, it could be. It could be. Like I said, I cannot make the distinction because we are not placed at this level to make it.
Asking you questions that you can't really answer. I know, I appreciate it, but I'm, trying to understand myself. I mean, I think one of the things in the Betsey's case is that people that took these loans, and I know you can't really tell me much because you didn't work for them, but they were then, they lost their jobs. And then they had to go into exile because they were told that they should leave the country. And then they didn't have a job, they're in a foreign country, and they can't pay these loans. So I guess, if I put myself in their shoes, when I'm coming back out of exile after those years out, I would, and I'm invited back, I would anticipate, flexibility, in dealing with my case because of what I've already been put through. And I guess, maybe if legally they had a right to do what they did with that property because they didn't bring the money in time, there's a question of, morally or whether that was fair in their situation to do that, And we're all about reconciliation here, right? Which is being, fair to people and giving everyone a fair chance. But I'm going to ask my colleagues to ask some questions.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lablache. We know each other from a long way back. A couple of questions to do with government policy. Today you hear a lot of the time 2 points mentioned. One, that state land should not be sold to people who already have land. And two, that the land must be advertised for sale. It can't be sold privately to just anyone. Having heard from what you have researched and found out in this case, where somebody's land was repossessed in 1984 and left idle until 1994, at which time they had negotiated an agreement and they signaled their preparedness to pay. And within a short time of them signaling that they were ready to meet the conditions which had been agreed, their land is sold to somebody else. Would you consider that a fair sale?
Yeah. Like I said, I don't know. There seems to be some missing, because it looks like the intention was there. What happened, I don't know. I am not privy to that information. It seems to me that there was an intention by the correspondent that I've seen to make good and to, give Mr. Betsey back his land, pay back and get it back. But I don't know what happened then. I mean, I was not in SHDC, so I can't tell. But I find it strange, like you saying, that it did not happen. And I'm a bit, I said, but, how come it did not happen? Especially, there was an agreement to pay 10,000 rupees up, and then maybe by installment. I would have thought that would have been a good deal, because the value of the land from 1984 to 1993, let's say, there was a different value of land. It had appreciated significantly. We were then in the Third Republic.
Now, you have been involved in dealings with land valuations and all sorts of things, every aspect of land transactions. Would you consider 80,000 rupees a fair price for 2 acres of land at La Misère?
1994.
1994. Yeah. I don't know who valued it at the time. I don't know. It seems a bit on the low side to me, but in 94. Maybe it was valued in 92. I don't know.
But if you valued it 92 and then you didn't sell it until 94. Would you revalue it before you sold it?
Normally, if there was an agreement that was ongoing with the buyer, then there was no point in revaluing the agreement. There was an agreement to sell at such a date, and it was valued. Maybe if it was sold 2 years after, then the value would basically, you would have to respect the agreement that you made, the offer that you made. But I don't know whether there was one. I can't tell.
You mentioned that, well, Mr. Betsey also mentioned that he had met with Minister Charlotte. So what happened then? I mean, that's very recent. What is the present ministry's position on this issue? Do you know?
Well, I did manage to have a chat with her. And because I was not aware of it, so I had a chat. I said, I heard that you met with Mr. Betsey. He says, yes, I did meet, and because the president had sent a query, what's happening, and I think what is on the file actually with her is that it should go to the land tribunal. This is what I saw. And she said, yes, this was an old case of SHDC, so she doesn't know. She's new. She's a new minister. She wasn't there at the time, so it's very difficult for her to assimilate things. But she said, yes, send it to the land tribunal.
They have actually filed before, and you're on the Lands Tribunal, right? On the 6th of August, 2019, and thereafter. So, yes, thank you.
According to your experience in this sphere of the domain of lands in the Seychelles, I'm thinking of our mandate as a commission having to bring forth reconciliation and national unity in the Seychelles. Do you think, according to the documents you have, the fact that the Betsey family has lost their property, not to their fault, but because of circumstances, imprisonment, loss of job, forced to exile, and during the time of exile, struggling to survive, would you consider it to be a good proposal to request from the government a compensation of any sort, maybe to ask the government to give the equivalent of the loss of property to the Betsey family?
Thank you, Bishop. I think in the spirit of the work you are doing, I think you are doing a great job. I've been following some of your deliberations. I think it's quite important chapter in our history, so that we, at least, we try and go into this reconciliation, for things that have happened in the past. I obviously, as a person, maybe nothing to do with my job, but as a person, I feel the grief. I feel the grief and, of course, the suffering that the Betsey family must have gone through. I feel it. I share it with them. And so things like that should not happen. Should not happen. Obviously, it's a dark chapter in our history. we are here today to try and make amends and see how best we do that, whether we forgive, whatever happens. It's important that we move forward. And sometimes in moving forward, we have to do things that in order to make things right. Like I said, in this particular case, I do not know. I do not know what happened in that time. But I believe, I understand you have other witnesses that are coming forward on this case, this particular case. Maybe at the end of the day, something good will come out of it. And I hope it does, because it's, it is a sad case indeed. Thank you. Thank you.
You've been very helpful. Thank you very much for coming. We will be seeing you again. We'll probably see you quite a bit, unfortunately for you, right? But yeah, you seem to have a lot of information. I mean, I think we will look at this legislation so that we're a bit more equipped to question you next time we see you. But thank you very much for your willingness to come, and answer questions. My apologies for asking you questions that you couldn't answer. We're hoping we can find someone who can answer those questions for us. But come forward, voluntarily to cooperate, it means a lot to this commission. So we thank you very much for that. Thank you. And you're released.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. Before we adjourn today, I just wanted to say something which you are then going to say in Creole. You're allowed to leave here. It's a couple of people have asked me about witness protection. So what can we do to protect people that want to come forward but fear coming forward? We do have an understanding, Bishop Wong will support me, with the police, that if anyone has any concerns, the police will be there to protect you and to make sure that you're safe and to assist you. So I don't want anyone to feel that they come forward and they feel vulnerable as a result of coming forward. We will support you, and we do have resources available to us in our two officers at the back of the room, in the police, and we rely and believe in their full cooperation. I will pass to my Vice Chair.
Bon, ça qui nous était content, tout le monde est clair là. Il y en a du monde qui demandé s'il n'y en a aucune façon d'une protection, ben, du monde qui vient soit comme un complainant, soit comme un témoin, mais qui paie, qui risque d'être abusé, attaqué, quelque chose comme ça. Nous en avons l'arrangement avec la police pour nous capables de donner protection à des gens qui sentent qu'ils ont besoin de sa protection. Nous pouvons supporter des gens qui croient qu'ils ont besoin de sa protection. Et nous avons fait l'arrangement avec la police chaque fois que nous avons une demande pour avoir sa protection. Bishop Wong, il a nos contacts avec la police. Et nous avons une bonne coopération avec la police. Alors, nous avons certifié pour dire que nous pouvons donner la protection nécessaire. Merci.
So we will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. with evidence in relation to case 003, the case of Daniel Auguste, and we will hear the complainant in closed session from 9 a.m. until 10 a.m. The session should be open to the public with the first witness at 10 a.m. I should note that we have not completed the hearing of witnesses in case 001 or 002, and we'll hear additional witnesses in both cases next week. And for the record, we'll be clear to indicate to what case we are hearing evidence, so it's case 1, 2, or 3. We stand adjourned now until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I thank you. Bye.
All rise.